How are you guys doing? Very excited today to share a little bit more of what we do here at the Hit Music Studio, especially when it comes to editing and choosing sounds for keyboard players. And one of the things that we like here at the Hit Music Studio is to truly get our students to have some information that can save them time. So if we are meeting for the first time, my name is Diego from the Hit Music Studio. I am the director and owner. We are a South Florida music school with two locations, and one of the things that for me personally is very important is to try to save people time. Try to save some of our students some of the elements that I went through to get a lot of this information, and at the same time give them pointers that hopefully can just make their process of learning how to play piano and keyboard very pleasant, very easy, very accessible. So for us, we definitely like to share information. We're constantly putting content out there on our multiple social media channels. But here we're going to be talking about sounds, especially for keyboard players. And one thing that to me is amazing in this time that we're going through is that when I started doing a lot of virtual classes, where we were mostly a physical music school, but with changes we went directly into doing a lot of virtual lessons. Most of my students, I feel like, do not know how to use their keyboards at all and have, for the most part, probably never really touched the buttons and don't know what sounds and what it can do. So for us, that has been a very eye-opening thing of trying to help them and trying to get them specific content. Now, one thing that I would like to say, and I can even do this, and I was trying to get a thing ready to show you guys a couple of pictures. I used to be a photographer, and I did photography for probably about 4 or 5 years of my life professionally. And one thing that was amazing to me is that when you are a photographer and you go and take pictures for a wedding, you come back with 1,500 pictures. Now, out of the 1,500, probably there's maybe 20 that are really incredible pictures. There's probably like about a couple hundred that are very good. And there's a collection of probably like 150 that are terrible. Now, you do not show the terrible ones. You delete them, you make sure that the client doesn't see them. But one thing that it comes to, if I equate that to music, it's when you have a keyboard and the keyboard has some terrible sounds, you don't use them and don't play a song with them, and don't, like, when your family comes over to play or to hear you play, I would choose the best sounds that your keyboards has. And I think for me, and I have owned all sorts of keyboards, high-end keyboards, cheap keyboards, we always have access to some sounds that sound pretty good and some that don't. So the goal today is to have you come out of the class hopefully knowing what to look for in the main categories of sounds. So one thing, and we're using a couple of like fairly new things, especially for me here. So let's see if this works. So once again, choosing an editing sounds workshop. So thank you for joining us. I think for us it's super cool to be able to do what we're doing here and to get you guys to continue to be a part of what we're doing. So let's start with piano. So now piano sound. Piano is usually the first one, and piano is usually one that a lot of keyboards have very, very easy to find. Sometimes you turn the keyboard on, it's directly on a piano sound. So we want you to look for a clear and pleasant tone. One thing that happens with piano, and I'll start playing a couple of the keyboards that I have here in a second, is you want to look for one that is very as realistic as possible, and you want to avoid a couple of things as it says there on the bottom with like vibrato and the such. So let me change here to the other camera so you guys can see the keyboards. Now, by the way, I have 3 different keyboards, and I did this on purpose. Hopefully they are a little bit like, I guess, center there. Now, the top keyboard is a Roland JDXI. This is about a $500 keyboard. This is the red one. Now, below there, that's a PSR 3E313. That's about a little bit less than 200, I believe, when we purchased this one for the school. And on the bottom here, I have a Motif ES6. This is a pretty big, bulky keyboard, pretty heavy. This keyboard on the bottom is particularly expensive, and I wanted to do this workshop directly with the idea of giving you guys 3 different almost like brackets and explain the differences between them. One thing, and I wanted to say this directly before we start, we do not want anyone to think that this is about having you change the instrument that you have. The instrument that you have is probably what you need at this time. If you want to change your instrument, there's always time to save for that, but you don't need to necessarily come out of this workshop being like, oh, I need a new instrument. No, try to do the best into what you have. And a friend of mine says that you should have an instrument that truly goes with the level of skill that you have. So if you're a beginner, almost everything would do. Now, as you get a little bit more advanced, there are differences. So in the keyboards that I have here in front of me, I can tell you directly, like, for example, when would you use the bottom one? The bottom one is almost $3,000 when that keyboard was new. You need this type of keyboard when you're playing at particularly big events and when you're doing things that have to do with arenas, big shows, recordings, because this type of keyboard, the one on the bottom, the signal that it has, it's a particularly strong and really present signal. So you don't need that to play in your living room. So the one that I have here on the top, and I have a good example there of a sound that we probably should not start with. Now this one, I think it's also sounds pretty good. But this one, when you start plugging in with a really big system and you're playing for 5,000 people, is gonna sound not that great. So it's almost like the keyboards are designed, I believe, into especially their application. And one of the main things that we want to talk about today is like, okay, depends on what you're using and what you're doing with your musicianship, you probably are fine. I'm gonna do most of the sounds and most of the, I guess, workshop with the one in the middle because I think it's very accessible to people, and I wanted just to show you a couple things on the bottom one. Now, one thing there on this one on the Yamaha, this one tends to have a little bit of too much reverb. So there, I can take the reverb off, and you can hear there where in the reverb is a setting, it's like an echo effect. You want to try to look for a keyboard sound, especially for piano. I wouldn't put too much reverb. I think the reverb almost like gets a little bit in the way. So I would probably try to, if you can, make sure that the reverb sounds a little bit on the, okay, natural. Like reverb, you don't want to make it sound like you're inside like a huge cathedral. I think it would almost get a little bit distracted. Now, if you look at this piano sound, I think Yamaha tends to have a pretty good one from the keyboard that is $200 to this keyboard that is like $3,000. Now, I think one thing that I definitely want to recommend when it comes to piano is do not use sounds that are really bright. Now, unless you're playing Latin music, you don't need a super bright tone. So I think it's almost a really annoying type of tone to do this for certain styles of music. Now, maybe if you're doing something that is very like dance and it's very like, you do want that because of energy, but for the most part, I think it's important to have a very clear tone when it comes to piano. Now, that is, of course, it's important to look through your pianos. Now, there's a couple of pianos usually on keyboards that have a little bit of a, like, I don't know, just a very specific, like almost like application. That's a honky-tonk piano. All of this, I would believe, I would try not to use them too much unless the song absolutely requires them. So if you're playing for your church or for your school, like if the song has straight piano, I would try to do it with that. And one of the big suggestions that I have with piano is if your keyboard does not sound that great for piano, and I know there's a couple of ones that I have seen already that that's the case, maybe it's good to choose an electric piano, which is our next category here that we're going to be talking about. So piano, I think, is a very, very important sound to have and to have it at all the time that you can like go back to it. I would say is most of what we do in keyboards. So whenever you're playing, you're going to play, I don't know, a good amount of the time just with the piano sound. So having a nice one is important. So let's jump into the next category. The next category is going to be electric piano. Now, electric pianos, and the one picture there is a Fender Rhodes. Those pianos are very, very specific. It's an electric piano. Sounds a little bit like a keyboard, but it actually has strings. And this is an old model that became really popular. One thing that I would really mention on this one, and I'll play a couple of sounds for it, you want to look for one that is a little bit on the darker side. Now, this particular keyboard, the one that I have in the middle, tends to have a couple of electric pianos that I think are like too bright and almost like a little bit probably too dated. So I would try to find a piano. That to me is still, that's probably like one of the best ones. But on the top keyboard, on the JDXI, I have a Rhodes that I really like that I think it's a much better recreation, and you can see there, and you can probably hear the difference. To me, electric piano, one of the goals of electric piano when you're working with a band, doing some things, is going to be to play a specific sound. And let me jump back here to the other shot. When you're working with this type of sound, one of the goals is to blend. So you want an electric piano sound that is not as bright as some of these, because that, among other things, makes it sound a little bit like it's 80s type of music. So you have to see what you're trying to do. And one suggestion that I have is to always create like a list. Create a list of the sounds that you like the best out of your keyboard, and almost have that list at all times. Because sometimes the keyword here on the bottom has 3,000 sounds, I believe, and it's so big that it's easy to just get confused into where they are. So one thing that is important there is to make your own list and start to have your favorites. Another thing, and of course this comes when you have a little bit more experience and have more instruments, it's of course a great thing to use certain keywords for certain sounds. And I would tell you, like, of all of the keywords that I have, I probably really use and love less than 10 sounds out of each one. And that even comes from really expensive keywords as well. So it's almost like it's good to get into which ones you like and be able to use them. So I think that pretty much covers electric piano. I think on electric piano, definitely avoid bright sounds that sound very dated, unless that is something that you're going for. Now, the next one up that we have is going to be an organ, the organ type of sound. So let me switch here. So organ is definitely a great one to have, and I can tell you it's a little bit of can be a little bit of a challenging. There on the slide we have a picture of a B3, and I have the incredible privilege for a couple of years to play one at a church that I used to be, I guess, a hired musician for. That is a very specific organ. You can hear them in rock all the time, and I won't get too much into details, but they have a very specific speaker that a part of the speaker is literally mounted on a thing that rotates, called a Leslie speaker. They sound amazing, and this is like literally the true, almost like the source of a lot of the organs. One of the things that I wanted to mention when it comes to organ is that organ, when talking about a church organ, at a church organ, you are literally dealing with a sound that is designed to be played by itself. Like almost like the organ at a church is designed to recreate what an orchestra can sound like, and it has a bunch of different sounds. That type of color, and I'll play it in a second, tends to not really blend well when you're playing with other instruments. So it's almost like the Hammond B3, which is one of the most classic types of sounds. That one tends to be one that blends really, really well in rock and in jazz and in all different styles. But I think that's where you really have to be careful. So let's go here to a close-up so I can show you some specific on the sounds, and you guys can get an idea. So for example, we have here maybe this one. So now when it comes to an organ, I would say you probably can use two. A fairly non-aggressive one that is a little bit like less colorful. When you're going to this type of sound, I think that if the song requires it, it may be a good thing. But when it comes to organ, I would definitely absolutely avoid the ones that tend to be like this. Okay, that's gonna make it sound super, like, I don't know, almost like a different style of music, and even more the church stuff. Unless you're that for specifics that maybe a song has that, I think it could be a good thing. But absolutely, I think organ it's a great sound to have, and it's one that I can tell you there's some high-end keyboards that just sound like an organ. It's one that my suggestion will be try to get one that you like and almost like stick to it, and get one that is on the darker side. And I know when we're talking about sound, it's almost like hard to describe them with adjectives. But at the same time, you'll see when it comes to an organ sound, it's important for the notes to hold, because when you're playing certain styles, that's exactly what you want the organ to be able to do. So hopefully that is a good amount of information when it comes to organ. Let's jump into the next category. The next category is going to be strings. So let me see if we can switch here. Now, strings are, of course, they come from the string section, and this is going to be the string section of an orchestra. One of the things that I see when it comes to strings is find one that recreates like a whole section. Like there are sounds, and I'll use them here in a second. There are sounds for strings that tend to recreate one instrument. So we're talking about violin or just maybe a cello. Those, in my opinion, tend to sound pretty thin. Now that's the keyboard in the middle, the 3-1-3. That type of sound, I would absolutely suggest that you guys would avoid it. That's just one violin. It has a little bit of vibrato there. To me, I would not play that at all in anything. I think it's better, and this same keyboard has a much better sound that sounds like this. So when it comes to strings, I think it's not necessarily about getting a sound that really recreates the tone of a string section as much as find a sound that sounds pleasant. Because I think that can really be something that can get in the way. Strings have a lot of nuances, so it's important to find a string sound that sounds very pretty. You have, when you play strings, I think one thing that you can potentially do is to try to maybe audition it by playing octaves. Because one of the things that us keyboard players do when you're in a band setting, you're playing with, like, say, guitars and drums and bass, it's very like common to do melody lines and to be able to play them as octaves. So if a sound sounds good, one suggestion on specifically on strings is to find so they're usually called synth strings. I think most companies do a pretty good job at having like a synth string sound that really sounds good. So I would definitely avoid, and let me put here the slide hopefully back on. I would definitely avoid with the ones that have vibrato. I think vibrato can really get in the way of a lot of things. Higher end keyboards have a way for you to control the vibrato. Vibratos, of course, like when it sounds like the note is gonna like almost like going up and down in pitch. And I would try to avoid that type of sound because I think it may also not necessarily be that pleasant. One thing, and I wanted to mention this at the beginning, and I forgot. My goal of this is to talk about sounds for using them live. So this is to play with other people. This is to do stuff at your church or your school. So there's a whole other world of if you're trying to record your own music. And I think that is absolutely a beautiful thing to do and something that we want to encourage you guys to be able to have access to. But at the same time is one thing that for the majority of our students, I think what's more realistic is that they're going to get quickly to the point of playing with other people. So we're talking about sounds that you can use when your friend comes over and she has a song that she likes and you guys want to play it and you're the piano player, she's going to sing it and you guys are going to do that together. So that I think it's an important part of the emphasis. So let's jump, I guess, to the next one. Now, one thing that we have next is lead sounds, and leads are very, very useful. Now, to me, a lead is the type of sound that tends to really have to cut through the mix. So they tend to be a little bit on the aggressive side. So and they need to definitely have a lot of like punch and a lot of power. So leads, you want to look for one that like somewhat sustains well, and that they have an ability to really be like prominent. It's almost like when you're playing lead sounds, for the better, you're trying to almost be the main attraction of that section of the song. So if I put that on the other camera so you guys can see it. Now for a song like Sweet Dreams, by the way, all of these categories are divided like this by companies. So those are like the main ones. There's other sounds and effects and stuff, but I think this one can definitely be the ones that I would like for you guys to do a list You do have a PDF download, so if you haven't done that, definitely check the link of this video so you can receive the download, the document that we made, so you can almost create your own list of sounds that you really like to use. Now, when it comes to leads, I think there are a lot of different varieties. One thing that I would like to say is try to get sounds. Let's play that here. You could potentially on leads have 2 or 3 different ones, because I think there are songs in which you're gonna need a lead that is not this aggressive. You may need a lead that it's a little bit less, you know. So definitely, I try to avoid lead sounds that have way too much effect, and that the lead tends to like really, I don't know, almost change through when you hold it. This is a good example on this bottom keyboard. So that to me, it's almost like could get a little bit too distracting. So lead sounds, definitely I would say avoid sounds that change too much when you press a note and hold it, because that can almost, I don't know, take away a little bit into what you're doing with the notes. And it's good to find probably at least 2 different ones, because you are going to use them at different times. So when it comes to brass, and brass is a very, very, very tricky one. So one thing that happens with brass, and brass I still to this day, after so many years of doing keyboards and to playing with artists and stuff, is one of the ones that is just really, really hard. Brass and guitar are 2 of the sounds that are just, it's really challenging for keyboards to come and sound really good. One thing that I would suggest with brass is that you try to find probably a synth brass. And there's a couple of patches in keyboards that work well for that. I have, and this is even one thing that when I bought the bottom keyboard, which is a high-end and expensive one, I felt like, oh, awesome, I'm gonna have like a great sound that just, you know, does what I need to do for horns. Because especially we're here in close to Miami, and you play a lot of Latin music, and you definitely need a good brass sound. Now this one, in my opinion, is not that great. It tends to be a little bit too boxy and a little bit too bright. So for me, when you're gonna play brass, you definitely want one that sounds good more than one that recreates how things really work with trumpets and trombones and all that. The one on the top, if you can see it there. Now this is a synth brass. I think that one would probably be a better choice for me than that bottom one, because I think that bottom one, when you play and you play with other people, it almost may sound a little bit like what's going on with that sound. I sometimes, and this is I think my hopefully the biggest takeaway for you guys is like, don't choose necessarily a sound that you're trying to imitate something else. Choose something that sounds good on your instrument, because I think that is going to be like when someone records a song and when someone goes into a studio, one of the things that it's like amazing is like, to me, there's 2 worlds. There's the live world and there's the studio. When you go into a studio, sometimes you have access to these instruments that you're never gonna have when you're doing shows. But at the same time, that puts in a position that when someone's trying to play that song for their family, it's not gonna sound the same. So it's almost like better don't concentrate on recreate, play the notes and of course play it correctly, but the sound, choose a sound that sounds good on your keyboard. And I think that is definitely a very, very good thing about trying to do this. So I believe we have our last category. The last category is going to be pads. And pads, and let me show you a little bit of like what do we consider pads. Pads tend to be very, it's an instrument that we can use to, it's a sound that we can use to get you guys to almost be on the background musically. So one thing about them, and I'll play one here. I like this one. I think this one tends to have a little bit too much. Now that to me, as it says there on the bottom, avoid pads that swirl, that has a lot of effects. This one has too much swirl. That amount of swirl to me can really get in the way. The other one that we use fairly regularly when we do shows is coming from the JDXI, and I think the JDXI has a couple like particularly nice pads that were here. So for example, one thing that I would suggest when it comes to a pad is that you want to be on the low side in terms of like volume. So normally you're going to be playing with other instruments, maybe with a guitar at the same time. So you want to look for a pad that blends well. The one that I have here on the bottom, that one is probably not even designed to blend, but I would say depending on the song, you truly want to try to find a sound in your, palette of sounds that is a little bit more less aggressive. Now, as you can see, and one thing, and I do this all the time, like I pretty much almost never play with just one keyboard because to me, it's very, very useful to be able to combine multiple brands of keyboards and be able to at the same time choose the best ones. For some reason, and that's probably another workshop that we'll do at some point. It's hard to have a keyboard that would just almost fulfill all of your needs as a keyboard player. That usually comes from multiple different brands and different models. One thing that nowadays with keyboard players, you can get what's called soft synths, and you can put them in a computer, and then you can play using a controller, a keyboard that doesn't really sound, that is almost triggering your computer. And there it's a little bit easier to be like, okay, I need this 10 sounds for a show and be able to get exactly the ones that you want. Now, at the same time, that can get expensive because those are more high-end instruments. So for us, really, really important in this type of like setting to tell you guys that it's not about the instrument. Is musicianship, I truly believe, comes from your ability to play, to be connected emotionally to what you're doing. So at the beginning, the goal of this class is to get you guys started with a list. Take your sounds, check which ones you like, which ones you don't. Try not to use the ones that don't sound good, and at the same time try to see, and that's something that you can even edit. For example, like there's a couple of things regarding the attack and the release of a sound. Those higher end keyboards have it. You don't need to go into like thousands of dollars for worth of a keyboard, but you do have it every now and then that you can tweak the attack and the release of a sound. That means that you can tweak how quickly the note sounds and how quickly the note stops sounding when you let go of the key. Those things, and edit your sounds a little bit, we're gonna make them sound better. I would say also keep in mind when it comes to editing to truly check for effects. A lot of the keyboard players that we have, and this is even more of a thing that we're trying to put the word out, it's important for you to check your owner's manual, and be able to understand your keyboard, know what it can do and what it can't do. We have a collection of students that I have been like, do you have a metronome on your keyboard? No, I don't. What brand is your keyboard? And I kind of like Google it, get a picture of it. Okay, press this button. Oh, it has a metronome. Okay, I don't know how to change the speed. Okay, press this button. I think as a musician, especially as a keyboard player, keyboards are and have been for a while computers. It's literally a small computer. You want to be familiar with them, and at the same time I think you want to spend a little bit of time just checking on the manual. Manuals can be confusing, but at the same time it's good to be like, oh, I didn't know that it can do that. We do want to do a workshop specifically on knowing how to operate a keyboard, because there's a lot of things that we have seen with students that are young that they're not that clear. But at the same time, I think we do want you guys to, when someone comes to your musical life, comes to your house and they want to play a song, you go, oh, like this song it's organ. Okay, put an organ. It shouldn't be like that you haven't even checked the sounds. I can tell you, and we can somewhat close up with this. Every time that I get a keyboard, I do always the same thing. I spend a couple of hours sometimes going through every single sound and just writing on a list. That one's a great organ. This is a great lead. This is a great piano, but I don't like that's too much reverb. Let me take a little bit of them out. So one thing, it's almost like an instrument out of the box. For the most part, I think can sound better if you tweak it a little bit and if you spend some time like checking like a couple of things regarding. So we definitely want to encourage you guys to get a little bit of a better gauge of what you can do with your instrument, because it's not about just taking an instrument, especially a keyboard player, and just open it and then always play with 001. I think keyboards have a lot to offer. And let me finish by saying this. I think in 2020, your ability to play keyboards is very important. Like piano players and people that only play piano, don't know anything about sounds, don't know even what they're called or what the differences are. I think it's a little bit more of a narrow type of space. So we want to broaden what you guys can do. And I think it's really, really cool, because music is like flavors. If you go to an ice cream place, do you always order the same thing, or every now and then you go like, oh, let me try a different flavor? In music and in piano, we have a lot of different sounds. A lot of keyboard players today, especially for example, like say in Broadway. In Broadway, you have sometimes 3 or 4 keyboard players doing a Broadway show, because the keyboard player is not only playing guitar sounds, is playing the trombones, like clarinets, is doing all sorts of different parts on a keyboard. So, but you have to understand how those sounds work and how those instruments work. It's not just putting a patch and be like, okay, let me just check how this notes go. It's about trying to recreate how that specific sound goes. So hopefully the workshop was, I guess, informative. Definitely consider subscribing to our channel. Check our other free workshops. We have a playlist for that. And we'll continue to share things that we do here at the Hit Music Studio. You can check what we're up to on our main website, thehitmusicstudio.com. And we hope to see you guys very soon. My name is Diego again, and thank you for watching. We'll see you soon. Take care.